All right, good afternoon. I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for coming here today. I'm Spencer Van. I'm the project manager. We have Alec Tuchscher, the software developer, Ben Balco, machine learning engineer, Will Dean, systems engineer, Noah Beankin, machine learning engineer, and Mackenzie Rafe-Schneider, the deep learning specialist. So what was our objective this semester? What have we been doing? What were we working on? Essentially, we were researching ChatGPT and machine learning and trying to determine the viability of using ChatGPT to automate network management tasks and everything that we could possibly do with it. But before we get into that, I want to give kind of a brief overview of what AI, machine learning, deep learning, what these buzzwords actually are and what they might mean. So if you look at the picture above, we picked this one because we kind of liked it here. As you can see in the yellow circle, there's our AI, or artificial intelligence. Then there's the, I guess, orange circle for machine learning, and then there's the darker orange circle for deep learning. Again, this kind of represents how each are kind of a subset of one another. So again, artificial intelligence is a field that combines computer science and data sets to enable almost human-like thinking or problem solving. It's using machines to solve problems that usually only humans could do. Next, we have, again, machine learning here, which is a subset of AI. It uses algorithms and statistical models to enable computers to learn from data, identify patterns, and make predictions or decisions without necessarily being programmed to do so. Again, it's getting a little more refined. More things are going on there. Next, we have deep learning. Deep learning is a subset of, again, machine learning that uses layers of neural networks, and the more layers or the more neural networks that you have, the more, I guess, defined or refined the predictions or data will be. Deep learning is essentially striving to think like the human brain or think like we do, problem solve like we do. Next, we have NLUs, or natural language understanding. So what is this? Why is this important? It's a subset of natural language processing and artificial intelligence. This is relevant because this is essentially how computers can understand English, and so we can talk to them and they give us an output that we can understand. This is essentially how we can understand ChatGPT and use it. Next, I'm going to give it off to Will so he can explain a little bit more about ChatGPT.
Yeah, so before we get into our demonstrations showing how we implemented this technology, I want to give a little bit of an explanation as to the tools, the specific tools that we used. And I want to start that off by clarifying a few terms that you're going to hear today. So first is ChatGPT. It's often referred to as a language model itself, but that's not technically true. ChatGPT specifically is just what you see here in the screenshot. It is the web interface that OpenAI has provided and allows people to more easily access the AI models that is actually performing the responses to the questions. And I'm going to get into that in a second. Next is GPT-3, often, again, sometimes referred to as a model. But again, GPT-3 is not a model. It is more of a collection of multiple models. It can sometimes be thought of as like the third generation of the GPT series of models. And there's like 6 or 7 different models that are classified as GPT-3. The last thing here is Text DaVinci 3, which actually is a language model. It is a model that is very commonly used by ChatGPT. So if you ask ChatGPT a question, it's really Text DaVinci 3 responding to your question. And it's also going to be the model that we will be using today during our implementations outside of ChatGPT. So if you're unfamiliar with how language models work, or specifically how to use them, it could almost be thought of like a smart search engine. So if you think of something like Google, when you type a question in there, what you're really doing is you're trying to find keywords that you can put into the query, and then Google searches its databases for images or websites that match the keywords that you have selected. And then it provides, you know, a billion responses, and you have to find the one that you think is correct. But using a language model, you ask your question in a very human-readable format. Hi, can you please help me solve this problem? And then the model will interpret that and respond in another human-readable, like, paragraph response. Sure, I can help you with that. Here are the steps to solve the problem, and here's why I have chosen these steps for your problem. This is very helpful for someone who may not be familiar with a question that they're asking, because they can not only get the response they're looking for, but they can also get justification for why that response was chosen. And the last thing that is important to remember here is that context is remembered through multiple queries. You go to Google and you send like one question, you ask another one right after, and the first one is completely gone. There's no context remembered. But using ChatGPT or other language models by OpenAI, you're able to refine your initial question. And if the first response that you get is not accurate or not really in the direction that you're looking for, you can ask a follow-up question to clarify something that may have been missing in your first question, or try to point the AI back on track to get it to respond with what you're actually looking for. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ben here, who's going to get us started on some ways that you can use language models in network automation.
Alrighty, the first thing I got for you here today, as Will was talking about, I'm going to give you a couple examples of how ChatGPT, the actual website in itself, can be just useful on its own. The first thing I thought of was something I noticed when first getting into a production type network in a job, and I'm sure all of you have noticed this too. Not everybody uses the same type of network devices. And I thought, since some people have to use stuff like Juniper network switches and HP devices, I thought it would be interesting to see how good ChatGPT could translate from one type of networking language over to another. So here we have a simple Cisco iOS network configuration, and I've asked it to translate that over to a Junos network. As we can see, it is slowly but surely giving the command equivalents in Junos of what our network was in Cisco. This is more of a useful tool for people who may not have worked with a certain type of device in a production environment before. This way they can learn what they're looking for and what type of commands they should memorize in the future. And for my second example, I thought it could be useful in AWS. We all know AWS. The GUI is pretty good. But what I thought gets kind of tedious in it is when you have to keep using the GUI to make more and more types of configurations and devices. So I thought it would be cool if we could question ChatGPT to help us make a CloudFormation file using some specific standards that we've set. We've got a VPC, a subnet, security group, and an EC2 instance that I want it to form. We will ask it, and it will give us a YAML file. We can see it creating the VPC itself, and then subnetting it down for us, adding in that security group, and it even specifies the AMI that we want that would best suit our purposes. Then we could just simply save this file to our desktop and put it into AWS CloudFormation. And doing this, we could quickly and simply deploy multiple VPCs or devices on AWS in a timely fashion. This is just a couple quick examples of how the ChatGPT website in itself is useful, but I'm going to hand it back to Will to talk about how we actually implemented machine learning, ChatGPT, and DaVinci 3 into our own type of examples.
Yeah, so like Ben was saying, those two examples that we just gave were actually using OpenAI's official ChatGPT website. But we wanted to do our own implementation. And there's kind of a few reasons for this. One of them was just we had the control to be more specific with the context that we gave it. If we're going to be asking a lot of Cisco questions, we can preemptively tell the bot that it's going to be a Cisco-related question, which will narrow our response. But also, doing our own implementation doesn't require us to rely on like the ChatGPT service being available. We can just query the API directly and implement this same bot in our own environment wherever we want. Now, for the example today, we happen to use a Cisco WebEx solution using a custom chat bot that we wrote running on a Python script. And I'll go into some of the Python code a little later. But all that's important to know right now is the next few questions that we're going to demonstrate are going to directly go through the Text DaVinci 3 API instead of going through ChatGPT. But remember, Text DaVinci 3 is the same model that ChatGPT uses. So the responses that we are going to get should be very similar or identical to what we would get asking ChatGPT directly. So I'm going to turn it over to Mackenzie here, who is going to continue with some examples.
So yeah, AI is a very helpful tool for both students and professionals looking to quickly and easily create templates. I, for one, know how to create ACLs, but I don't have the time to do it, so I can ask our chatbot here to make a template that blocks ICMP, Telnet, and for the specific IP address, and allow all SSH traffic. So, and within seconds, I have a template. It is very easy, and yeah. And the next question or next example is using it to create a Jinja 2 template that deploys OSPF with these variables: router ID, area number, and network statements. What? So, yeah. Yeah. So it will spit out a deployment. Yeah. So it's working a bit, but yeah, it's just slow. But with this is very easy to create templates. And it helps reduce time and energy required. So I will hand it off to Noah to continue with the questions.
Right. So for the first example that I go over here is using it for the cause of troubleshooting network issues. The first one is we're going to use SSH as an example. Want to check and see why ChatGPT may think we may not be able to SSH into our device. We can ask it what it thinks are the possible causes for that, and it'll give us a list of things that we can check. Such as maybe making sure that SSH is enabled properly. Maybe you need to check the net connectivity. Just some useful advice, just of things to check to make sure that you can SSH into your device. We find this to be a useful tool because no matter your skill level, especially for people getting into the networking field, we find that it does a fairly decent job at explaining what things are when you ask it what it is, and can help you to troubleshoot things better and in a more timely manner. For the second example we'd like to show, we'd like to create a Cisco iOS configuration for a switch. We have our parameters set. We can give it the parameters, the type of device we have, and we can ask it to come up with a configuration for it. It's working on it right now. Takes a little bit of time. And you can see we have our config, names it, assigns a name to it, enables SSH, gives our VLANs and names them, figures the interfaces, etc. But what if say we forgot something in our config, like we forgot a VLAN, for example? As we mentioned, it can remember context. So what we can do is ask it to add a VLAN to the config that we just created. On that. No. And as you can see, it refines the config we just made and adds that VLAN that we reasonably forgot to do into the new config we just created. As you can see, this is a very useful tool for helping us come up with configurations for devices. Say your company got 1,000 new switches, you need a config to put on them to get them into your network quickly. This is a quick config that's compatible with your network and get it on there so you can get them up and running. And I'm going to turn it back over to Will to explain a little more.
So the reason that we decided to implement this using a WebEx bot was not arbitrary. This bot does actually have another feature that we want to demonstrate, which is being able to deploy a config file generated directly to our device list. So like if you have a bunch of routers, it can deploy a specific config to all of them. So our goal here is going to be to send a prompt to the Text DaVinci model, and it's going to send back just a blank or like a config file with no extra information. And then we can directly take that config and with one command deploy it to all of our devices. But you may have noticed some of the prompts that we've asked it today sometimes don't always generate exactly how we want, or they generate with a lot of unnecessary extra text, or they're formatted wrong or something like that. So what we really want to do is try to limit the variability in the responses that we get. And one way that we can do that is by, again, adding context to our queries. So I'm going to pull up the VM that's actually running the bot right now, because I want to show this one line of code here. And I'm going to open it up in a different view, which will be easier to read. But this is the line that adds context to the command that we're about to send. I'll pull it up here because I think it'll be easier to read. So this bottom part here. It says, generate the following config in Cisco iOS code without any comments or details, and do not add any notes to your response. It should only contain code. Imagine those two sentences are prepended onto the query that we're about to send using a special command. This is separate from the commands that we have been running before. Because if you're asking a general question unrelated to Cisco, you don't want that context included. But in this case, we do. So I'm going to take the config that Noah just showed us using this different command, which should include that extra context. And what we hope to see is that we are going to only get the iOS config and nothing else. And it should appear in a code block for easier reading. OK, so here we go. So now we can see the exact code that would be deployed to our device. We can review it here, make sure there's no mistakes and everything is in the correct order or the correct place that we want. If we're happy with it, the bot tells us we can run the next command, apply conf, and then we have to input a number. This number just signifies which devices to apply the config to. So for our example, I'm just going to do 1. Oh, I spelled that wrong. So apply conf 1. In a few seconds here, we should get a message saying that the deployment was successful. Yep, there we go. If you're wondering, this device, by the way, is also running in a VM that we have on this laptop. Normally, in an actual environment, you would have all of your devices in your network, but this is just for the example today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alec here, who is going to talk about some of the ways that AI has been implemented in network automation in previous years.
So AI and machine learning has been used in network automation for a long time, and has had a lot of use cases within network automation. You've probably seen a lot of companies like Cisco, Juniper, VMware, and others actually use it already. So something that they're doing is using deep learning, recursive neural networks, or LSTM models. And LSTM models are the one I want to talk about today, because LSTM models do one thing very well. They track a season and they can collect baseline data to analyze new data off of that baseline. So we can train a LSTM model on a baseline of data using, for example, data from our network. So for this example, we're going to use BNG subscribers, or broadband network gateway. Now, broadband network gateway allows subscribers to connect to a ISP so that they can connect to the internet. So you can see up in the top right there, we have a BNG subscribers graph in blue that shows actual recorded data of BNG subscribers. So on the right, we can see the list of layers that our LSTM model takes up. And this is the exact LSTM model that I'm actually using for this example. So you can see a little bit about how our demonstration is going to work, or how the next slide is going to work. So you can see the first one is an input layer called an LSTM input layer. So these layers, all of the ones that are called LSTM take in some amount of data and will store it into their memory cells. And occasionally, that data will flow through a dropout layer. And in a dropout layer, it randomly removes a certain amount of data according to the weight of that data. Now, whenever data is pulled in or changed or done anything with, it's assigned a weight to. And that weight goes between 0 and 1 to signify how much that data should be looked at or how important it is. So then we can see next, after the dropout layer, we get to a repeat vector. And the repeat vector will just scale a sequence of data for as long as it can or to a set length. And we actually set this one to 72. So it'll just scale it 72 times and continue trying to analyze it. So it runs it through another LSTM and dropout layer to further refine our baseline. And then we run it through a time distribution, which does something similar to what the repeat vector does, except scales it to an arbitrary amount so that we can actually analyze the baseline through a wide range of time. We go through another final dropout layer, and that's actually our output. So how does this all correlate to our BNG subscribers? Next slide. So you can see on the bottom there, the bottom right graph is actually the final output of this whole demonstration. So you can see the orange line right there is the predicted BNG subscribers, or the line that our AI model made. And the blue line is the actual recorded data that we use to train the baseline. So you can see it's identified a couple points in red there where it believes there's anomalies. And our anomalies are a point of data that has a high difference with a predicted data point. So we can calculate that difference by a metric called loss. Now what loss is just the absolute difference between the predicted value and the actual value. So we can check if that loss is over a certain threshold, and we've set our threshold at 99 percentile. And if it is, we can indicate that that's an anomaly. So this can be used to detect if a BNG subscriber station went down, or if there's technical issues or anything of that sort, or if there's a huge influx where there might be a denial of service attack or anything. But I want to go on to show how we can use ChatGPT to do something similar to this and do error analysis in a more human readable and user-friendly way. So I've designed this web app that will load a syslog file, and we can see we have 3 here as demonstrations. We have one pulled from Broadcom's website, one that I generated using Python code to make a sample lab, and one pulled from UW-Stout's actual lab here, where I generated a bunch of errors by randomly pulling plugs and doing bad things to the devices. And you can start to see here we have a lot of syslog messages, which are in somewhat human readable form, but this would be incredibly difficult for any user to just pick up and read. So you can see we can start analyzing our incidents by choosing a start and end incident by putting numbers in that correspond to the incident IDs. So you can see we're putting in 1 through 5. So we're taking a bunch of interfaces going down and up and line protocols going down and up. So if we submit that to ChatGPT, we can say it'll take a second before it actually responds because it's generating a response. And eventually it spits out a possible cause for these errors could be a physical issue, such as a faulty cable or port issue with Gigabyte Ethernet 000. A possible fix might be to check the wiring, replace the faulty cable if necessary, and make sure the port is configured and operating properly. This makes it much more easily to read. This gives clear possible causes, possible fixes, and it's pretty accurate. I'd say that's where I would probably start troubleshooting if I would see these syslog messages. So then we can load a different syslog file, specifically the one I pulled from Broadcom's website, to show what a more detailed analysis of an error would look like from ChatGPT's end. So we can see how we have a big syslog message, something about firewalls and protocols, and we can see that ChatGPT can just tell us simply, this error can be caused by a firewall rule blocking the UDP traffic. Check the firewall rules and any settings related to idle timeouts to ensure that the traffic is allowed and the timeout is set correctly. That's a pretty fair analysis. So I think that this could ultimately be used to make networking more user-friendly and make it so that users could actually understand what's going on within their network. They don't have to see scary log files or something archaic that they'll never understand. And I'm going to turn it over to Will to wrap things up.
So after all the research that we did throughout this semester and testing the implementations that we deployed, we've come to the conclusion that yes, ChatGPT and other OpenAI language models are very much relevant and definitely viable in a network automation environment, but with kind of one exception to watch out for. You can't just replace your entire IT staff with one person who has ChatGPT on their resume. As you saw today, some of the responses that we were given were maybe incomplete or slightly inaccurate or not really what we were going for with the initial question. And if you don't have the expertise or knowledge in the field to be able to identify those issues as they come up, you might deploy broken configs to your devices or have no idea how to troubleshoot problems that ChatGPT created. But assuming you do have the knowledge and or expertise to actually know what ChatGPT is giving you, then absolutely you can drastically speed up your workflow speed by being able to automate or mostly automate the very tedious parts of generating configs and deploying them. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming and listening to our findings today. We have a few minutes for questions if anyone has them.